Hello there, I'm Yash. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I created a small animation for the Agora community monthly animation challenge. I'm not an expert animator by any means. This challenge was basically me trying to practice my animation skill. So let's begin. I planned out my scenes with simple drawings. I wanted to showcase three main scenes: a Jedi meditating peacefully, the Jedi feels a disturbance in the Force, a Sith Lord attacking the Jedi in the end with a close up shot of the lightsabers clashing. With this outlined story in my mind, I began designing the environment. I started with some basic Rocky Mountain environment, but something about it didn't feel right, so I scraped it. Then I experimented with some Tatooine looking plateaus. Even this actually did not feel right as I could not get the proper look and feel. Finally, on my third try, I created the forest scene. I started with the mountains as the backdrop. These are simple planes expanded by proportional editing. I added another plane as the ground and used hair particle system to add some grass. I created the trees using the sapling add-on in Blender. I duplicated the instances of this tree to give a dense forest look. Then I proceeded to add the meditation platform, some stones and two lamps. Once the scene objects were ready, I played with the lighting. I used two sun lamps, one for the sunlight and one for the moonlight. I also animated the light to create a time-lapse effect. I added some background color, which was basically a color ramp, to change from daylight sky blue to black in the night. I then imported the character rig to the scene just to see if the scales and the placement were proportional. Coming to character setup, setting up Rain involved three steps. First was changing the color of her clothes, the shirt and the pants. Second was to add new boots. I modeled a simple boot using her feet as reference. I deleted her original canvas shoes. I parented the new boot to her rig and tested the animation. Finally added some cosmetic changes to her skin and her hair. I added some light tattoos on her skin. I wanted to get some Ashoka Tano kind of style on her skin. And then I changed her hair color to light sky blue. Similar to Rain, for the snow rig, I changed all his clothes to near dark black color. I added some new leather boots, like the ones that are standard Empire issue. I used a mask modifier to hide his legs up to his calf. Once the boots were completed, I added some red tattoos on his arms. The final step was his eyes. I wanted to give that evil feeling like Darth Maul. I changed his eyes to a combination of red and yellow. After this setup, the characters were ready for animation. For animation, the idea here was to animate the characters individually and then import the rig into the main scene. For Rain, I started with her expression. I played around with her face rig, with her mouth, with her nose, her eyebrows. I created two annoyed expressions, one default expression, two poses for eye open and eye closed, and then I created one shocked pose. I also played with her hands, created some poses for her hands, mainly keeping her palm open and then holding the lightsaber in her right hand. I added some extra poses as well, but I did not end up using them. Once the poses were ready, I animated her sitting in a lotus position, then turning around and grabbing the lightsaber using the force. I timed this animation about 1 second, around 23 frames. The lightsaber is a simple cylinder. I extruded it and added shape keys. Using the shape keys, I could turn the lightsaber on and off, and then added some emission texture for the light blue. And this was all for the Jedi specific animation. For Snow, there were two main animations. First was the run cycle. I animated the run cycle using a reference that I had created, basically adding all the run poses first and then animating them for 23 frames. The next step was to make him hold his lightsaber in his right hand. Similar to Rain, I added a hold pose and then parented the saber to his wrist bone so that the saber moved whenever his hand did. Next was to create a jump and slash animation. I created my own simple reference images and then created the poses. I timed the jump sequence for about 30 frames. It had to be a swift strike to unleash the power of the dark side. Once the character animations were ready, I could now begin animating the scenes. The first scene was simple. I imported the Jedi into the scene. I added a camera boom shot to establish the scene. The Jedi is meditating peacefully in middle of the forest. The Jedi floating was basically moving the rig up and down. Similar animations I used for the stones as well. I added the time lapse to day and night and created a particle system with some leaf to simulate some wind. Once the moon rises, I made the lamps rise. The whole scene was about 75 frames for day and about 70 frames for night. For scene 2, I wanted to pan and zoom out the camera to show a running sequence. I duplicated the first scene in Blender and I removed all the objects that were not necessary, like the platform, the stone, the lamps and the Jedi rig. I imported the Sith rig and I moved the trees around the rig. Used a mirror modifier to duplicate the trees on either side. I then created an empty arrow and I parented all the trees to the empty. The idea was to move the background and keep the rig static. So the Sith would be running in one place and the background would be moving, creating a running illusion. I also added a second camera and a bit of motion blur for the front look. The third scene was basically an extension of the first scene. Here I used the face poses of the Jedi that I had created. I animated those poses to create a disturbance in the force. She feels like there is a buzz. I used the dolly motion of the camera to zoom in into her face. It ended in a shocked look on her face when she realizes that the force is actually trying to warn her. I also increased the depth of focus on the camera as it zooms. This entire scene was about 70 frames. Scene 4 was basically about the Jedi turning around and the Sith slashing through the air with the lightsaber. As you can see here, I used the non-linear animation editor and I timed the entire sequence. This whole sequence was about 1 second. As she turns, I wanted to show the rocks flying off and falling down. So I created a simple curve guide and I animated the rocks manually to fall on the ground. I used the similar motion for the lamps as well. Once the animations were timed, it was just a matter of making the lightsabers clash. I made a slight modification to the placement of the sabers and the rigs. And then I proceeded to the final scene, which is a close-up of the light side and the dark side. The clashing of the lightsaber. Here I added 2 particle emitters, one blue and one red, to simulate the sparks. I also added some glare effect in the composition. This entire process took about 15 hours to create and about 5 and 6 hours to render. I learned a lot from this experience and I hope you do too, and it helps you kickstart your animation journey. And that's the video. If you like my content, please consider subscribing and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.